Welcome, everyone. You're here with Luminol on the Wall. I'm Becky.
And I'm Bevy.
And hey, sister.
Hey, Becky.
How's pregnant life going? How's life?
It's a struggle bus. Let's be real.
Yeah, you're getting to that point in the pregnancy.
Yeah.
Things are...
I'm having a little bit of a hard time, but I'm making do.
Fabulous.
I'm off work in like a month.
Woo-hoo.
So, just gotta make it through the next couple weeks.
Just keep swimming. Just keep swimming.
Just keep going.
Yeah.
But other than that, I'm good.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah, I am.
Good to hear.
You said you had a really good walk today.
Holy shit, it's so nice out. Oh
yeah.
My God.
We were in a deep freeze. It was freezing for like 3 weeks. And it's finally above zero.
We also made it through that.
Yeah.
But today was like the first day. The wind was not like, felt like ripping my face off.
Yeah.
Like the sun was nice, but the wind was a little brutal. But today was fabulous.
That's right. What dreams are made of.
Yes. That's what dreams are made of.
So, yeah. Other than that, like nothing new to report other than we got a bunch of clothes for the baby and a crib. My baby shower's coming up this Saturday.
Yeah, everyone's going.
Couldn't be more excited. So, you know, that's what's going on in my life.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys, if you heard that little toot, it's my phone. I have a toot notification.
Sound. Yeah. And kind of, I think this is starting to be a joke. You don't even know where I'm going with this, but this is starting to be a little bit of a joke. And Bev's sick again. She got another cold.
Yeah.
It's minor, but I have to laugh because I feel like every other week we're like, oh, Bev's sick. Oh no, her plugged cute nose.
Every time.
Every time.
And I'm reading, guys, so excuse the snotty mess of me right now.
Yeah.
It's just going to be what it is.
It is what it is, so.
Hopefully I'll, like, pause the recording before I take a big old snifferoonie. And you guys won't have to hear my sickness all that much. Because that can be nasty, you know.
I know, nasty Bev over there.
Classic nasty Bev. I just love that nickname.
Yeah, I bet you do. I really hope I remember that for next week. I'll be like, what's up, nasty Bev?
How about we don't?
No.
We're
not going to make that one happen?
No.
Dang
I
it.
don't want fetch to happen, Becky.
I like it,
not
though.
in this scenario, okay?
Sorry. Okay, I won't, hopefully.
So, this case today, you were kind of telling me a little bit about it, but why don't you tell everyone listening, give a brief overcap, a couple things they need to know before really delving into the details.
All right, probably the more prominent things to know about this is there is quite a fair bit of sexual assault that goes on, so do be aware that that is something we're going to talk about. It's super brutal. You know, this is tough because I just almost just want to give a warning and just leave the story to you, to be honest.
Okay, well, let's leave it with the warning then. If this is something that you find hard to listen to, like, I don't know, there might be a bunch of parts to skip over.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's not the podcast to listen to if you are triggered by that topic.
Yeah. We don't go into detail, like hard detail about it. So I guess that's kind of good.
But it's a brutal case.
It's so brutal. So justice is served. I'll tell you that right out the gate. So that's, I guess, a silver lining. But otherwise, the floor is yours, Beverly.
All right. So the year was 2007. And everyone in Knoxville, Tennessee had just rung in the new year, including a young couple, Channon Christian and Chris Newsom, who had only been dating about 2 months when they rung in the new year together. So Channon Christian was 21 years old. She was a senior at the University of Tennessee, majoring in sociology. She was bright, kind, and had a promising future ahead of her. She was set to graduate from the university that year. Hugh Newsom, who oddly went by Chris, was Shannon's boyfriend and was 23 years old. He was a former high school baseball player who had attended and graduated from Pellissippi? Correct me, Becky, is that right or wrong?
Yeah.
Look at that. Pellissippi State Community College with a degree in carpentry. He was a hardworking guy and well-loved by his friends and family. Now, Saturday, January 6th, was just like any other Saturday. Chris had gone golfing with his buddy Josh for the afternoon, and Channon went to the Washington Ridge apartment complex and was hanging out at her friend's house while getting ready for her date with Chris later that evening. Around 8 p.m., Shannon's friend leaves to go to a party, which left Channon at her apartment all alone. And a little after 8 p.m., Chris leaves the golf course, and At around 8:45 p.m., Chris used an ATM to take out $100. Then at 9 p.m., dropped Josh off at the same party that Shannon's friend had gone to. Chris told his friends that he and Shannon would be there later. Chris then headed to the apartments to pick up Shannon. The couple decided to take Shannon's Toyota 4Runner instead of Chris's truck. So they make their way to the parking lot, and Shannon hops in the driver's side. Chris leans in for a cute little kiss, and then they're off to dinner as far as anyone knows. Also, just like a side little thing for everyone listening, and it's totally not related to the case or anything, but I'm having a hell of a time breathing. I just gotta say it. I am, like, struggling a little bit. Like, is it the baby? Is it the fact I can't breathe through my nose? Probably, like, a little bit of both.
Did she maybe have too many snacks?
But, yeah, so I do apologize if you hear any, like, labored breathing.
Yeah.
I'm working through it, but it's a little tough right now.
I was honestly sitting here wondering if you were going to address that.
Yeah,
like,
I had to.
Damn, it sounds like tough.
I'm like, sorry, guys.
Was she trying to add suspense?
No.
It's like the weirdest suspense ever.
Yeah, it's just
bear with her. She got a baby blocking her lungs a bit from expanding, and her nose is stuffy. There's no hope for her, but she's working through it.
Yeah,
she's trying her best. So
yeah,
no
try my
judgment,
best.
peeps.
So please give me a little bit of a break and a goddamn Kleenex and a goddamn Kleenex. Oh man, Becky.
Oh, Bevy.
So just to recap, Shannon and Chris off to dinner. And by the time 10 p.m. rolls around, Chris and Shannon's friends begin to wonder when they are going to get to the party. So they send a few texts to see if they are on their way. But when 11 o'clock rolls around and all the texts have gone unanswered and they still haven't shown up, Shannon and Chris's friends start to worry a little bit. In fact, Josh, who Chris had gone golfing with earlier, makes his way over to the Washington Ridge apartments to see if he could find his friends. But there was still no sight of them. He did notice Chris's truck still in the parking lot, which would be, like, considering what we know about what just happened, it should be there. And by this point, it had really only been about 2 hours since Josh last saw Chris. And although it wasn't like Chris and Shannon to just, like, ditch their friends, their relationship was new and hot. So could it be possible they are MIA because they wanted to be alone?
Totally possible.
Yeah, it wouldn't be like the first time that a new couple ditched their friends to spend some quality time. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah. We've all been there.
Yeah, so after that, I think the friends kind of just accept what is. They're like, yeah, possible explanation. They're off by themselves. No big deal.
Yeah.
And then around 12:35 a.m., Shannon actually speaks with her father on the phone, letting her parents know that she would be home around 2 to 3 a.m. So it seems like at this point,
everything's good.
Everything's good.
Yep.
However, the following morning, on January 7th, Shannon's friends and mom had attempted to call and text her, but could not get a hold of her. In addition, Shannon's boss ended up calling her mom to report that she did not show up for work that morning. Now, her mother was already worried, but this just amplified her worry. She started calling several of Shannon's friends and local hospitals. When none of them had heard from her either, she looked up Chris's parents' number in the phone book and called them. She asked if Chris was with Shannon and if they knew where her daughter was. And unfortunately, they did not. It turned out that Chris's family had been equally concerned about his whereabouts. When they realized that both families were searching for Shannon and Chris, their concern and fear heightened even more. So the two families decided they needed to call the police. Shannon's family was informed that because only a few hours had passed since they had last heard from the couple and that they were both adults, they were not yet deemed missing or couldn't be deemed missing. But by this point, regardless of what the police said, the families knew something just wasn't right.
Oh, yeah.
So, rightfully so, Shannon's father's frustrated, and he decides to call Shannon's cell phone provider to see if he could get their help. And they were able to tell him where her phone pinged from last.
Which, I'm just going to pause you there for a second, Bev, because this was in 2007. Like, I literally got my first cell phone in 2006. It was like the clicky clicker, you know, three clicks for one letter. And I feel like a lot of people were unaware of like what cell phones could do and like how they completely work. So I feel like that was kind of forward thinking of him to be like, I'm going to call.
Yeah, I agree
Smart
with you.
man.
That is smart. I didn't really
Yeah.
think of the year, but yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You're right. Like, cell phones were just kind of becoming popular
Yeah.
around this time. So, luckily, they were able to give him some information. And they told him that the last ping that they received from her cell phone had been near Cherry Street, which was a street located in a rough area of Knoxville and not a place Shannon would have chosen to go on her own. So, this was a big lead. And determined to find answers, the family decided to search the area for Shannon's forerunner. Now, at approximately 12:24 p.m., right about the time that the families are searching for Shannon's forerunner on Cherry Street, a Norfolk Southern Railroad train engineer reported to the Knoxville City Police Department that he had seen a body beside the railroad track. And at approximately 12:55 p.m., so merely like a half an hour later, police arrive and discover Chris Newsom's badly burnt body wrapped in a scorched blanket by the railroad tracks. This location was, in fact, in close proximity to Cherry Street where Shannon's phone was pinging last. Now, when Chris was found, he was wrapped up in a burnt blanket. His ankles had been restrained with a belt. His wrists were tied together with a shoelace behind his back. Chris's face had been wrapped with what appeared to be a sweatshirt, and another shoelace and sock had been tied around his head to create a gag.
Yes.
There was also a bullet wound visible on the right side of his head. Now, this location, to be more exact than just like the general area of Cherry Street, was actually near a street named Chipman Street, which was a residential and industrial area. Now, about 12 hours after Chris's body was found, at 1:38 a.m. on Monday, January 8th, Shannon's family found her forerunner parked on Glider Street, which was just around the corner from Chipman Street. They immediately called the police. Now, the first thing the family noticed about the forerunner was the stickers Shannon had on her forerunner's window had been removed. It didn't look like the vehicle was damaged, but again, there was no sign of Shannon. But Becky, just like to give everyone kind of more visual, can you kind of explain like where her forerunner was found in comparison to the railroad and Chris's body and like Cherry Street? Because we know her cell phone pinged off of Cherry Street, which I think you had said is like a horizontal main road, right?
Yes. And then Chipman Street and the train tracks ran parallel to one another and perpendicular to Cherry Street.
Right, so like a big T.
Yeah, a big T. And then Glider Street ran parallel to Cherry Street.
But a little bit further down.
But further down.
And just off of Chipman Street.
Yeah.
And that's where her forerunner was found.
Exactly. So when they say they were pretty close proximity, they were close.
Right.
Yeah.
Like all the streets ran off of one another.
Yeah.
Right. So with everything that's been found so far, I would think it's kind of safe to say that Shannon, like her body, is probably somewhere close within the area. But we'll find out. That's just, what I would think.
Yeah.
So, again, the police are called. And when the police arrived, they looked inside the SUV and noticed mud all over the floor mats. Now, Shannon typically kept her car clean, so that was pretty unusual in and of itself. As well, the seat was pushed so far back that she would not have been able to reach the pedals, indicating that someone bigger, taller than her,
muddier,
was the last person to be driving that vehicle. Yeah. In addition, several items were missing, including her phone charger, an engraved iPod, pictures of her mom, and a teddy bear that were all normally in her SUV. She also had a couple of Sears bags full of clothing that she was planning to donate in the trunk, and they were also gone. Now, curiously, there was a pack of Newport cigarettes found in the vehicle, but neither Chris nor Shannon smoked, so that raised alarms as well.
For sure.
And again, just adds to the theory that there was someone else in that vehicle.
That didn't belong
That
there.
didn't belong. So in the back seat, police also found an envelope from a bank, which was processed for fingerprints. And when the results came back, they matched a convicted felon named Lamarcus Davidson. He was a career criminal with a history of carjackings and violent offenses. And at the time of the disappearance of Chris and Shannon, he was actually living in a rented home just around the corner and up a couple blocks from the SUV at 2316 Chipman Street. Now, this address was coincidentally across the street from the railroad tracks where Chris was found, as we know. The home was fairly isolated, and across the street there was a large empty field and an empty lot filled with used tires. Behind that were the train tracks. Next to the home was a parking lot for the Waste Connections building, and behind the house stood another large industrial building. The house only had neighbors on one side of it. So, obviously, the police need to look into this felon. And just a day later, on January 9th, the police obtained a search warrant for Lamarcus's rental unit. And at approximately 1:39 p.m. on January 9th, when they approached the home, they noticed that the door was slightly ajar. A TV was on, but no one was inside the small house. So they entered and searched the premises. And it wasn't long until an officer stumbled upon a fairly large garbage bin in the kitchen. When the lid was removed, all they could see were blankets and garbage bags. So they pushed the blankets to the side and saw an arm sticking out of the garbage bag. They were able to determine this was the body of Channon Christian. She was found bound in tight fetal position. Her knees were pressed into her cheeks. There were strips of flower-patterned fabric binding Shannon's thighs to her chest. Her ankles were tied together with the same torn fabric. There was also a long strip of the fabric tied to and wrapped around her neck. Additionally, a garbage bag was tied around her head, and then her entire body was stuffed into 5 trash bags and then jammed into a large household garbage can. Shannon was stripped from the waist down. She was still wearing the camisole and sweater she had picked out for her date with Chris. Which I find this a little bit sad, because we already know that there was a trigger warning for sexual abuse / rape, right?
I did.
You let us all know.
Yeah.
And for her to be naked from the waist down, I don't know, that just, it paints the picture of exactly that. And it's pretty,
it's like heart-wrenching to know that that's how she was found.
Totally.
Because it really, like, without them doing any tests or really knowing what happened, they can almost immediately assume
that rape was involved.
That took place, yeah.
Yeah. Now, on one of the garbage bags was, in fact, a palm print that they were able to send in for testing, and that also came back to Lamarcus Davidson. So, at this point, the police put out a bolo for Lamarcus Davidson, which, if you guys don't know, because I always kind of forget, but bolo is be on the lookout, right?
Yes.
So, like, they need to find this guy.
Take him.
Yeah. Well,
bring him in.
Don't touch him. Don't go near him. This guy's a violent criminal, Becky.
Yeah. I mean, I was like speaking just from police perspective, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. It's
not like citizens.
Not the odd show. Like, hey, you see him? Let's just go
take him down. Take him in.
Down. What is it called when a citizen's arrest?
Yeah.
Don't do that. Like, let's not.
Yeah.
But in addition to looking for Lamarcus, the police were also looking to speak with the 4 other people that were living in that home, which were Lamarcus's brother. Can you help me out, girl?
Latalvis Cobbins,
George Thomas, Vanessa Coleman, and Lamarcus's ex-girlfriend, Daphne Sutton. But they were all MIA.
Not a good sign, Bev.
And at the home on Chipman Street, investigators also found Chris's cell phone and burnt driver's license. They also found Shannon's purse and a note that Shannon's friend had written and given to her, and photos of Shannon's mother from when she was younger. Photos that Channon had kept in her SUV but were coincidentally missing.
Mm-hmm.
They also discovered Shannon's social security card, an iPod with Shannon's name engraved on it, her pay stubs, a University of Tennessee commuter parking pass, and Chris's hat.
Like, that is a treasure trove of evidence.
Yeah, and it just puts both of them, Chris and Channon, at that scene. So, I don't know, obviously, like, I would think that's where they were murdered.
Yeah.
And then Chris's body was, well, an attempt to, like, get rid of it. And I think probably Shannon's was on the way out, too. It was in a garbage can. So it's pretty sad. There's a lot going on here. I'm just happy that these things were in fact found. Because obviously having no body and no evidence is
worst case scenario when someone goes missing.
So in addition to all of the personal items that were found at the scene, there were also 3 gasoline cans that were found on the kitchen floor, along with a bottle of bleach. As well, investigators recovered fabric with a floral design that matched the binding material used on Chris and Shannon's bodies. So both bodies were able to be linked to the fabric through matching rip patterns.
That's a fucking job.
Yeah, it's like, holy shit, isn't it though?
Yeah. To like match that up would be so challenging. Oh my god.
Yeah, you're not just looking at...
Hello, my name is Kristen Rigadel, and I'm a licensed insurance broker across Canada and in the United States. But I want to ask you a question. Is life super predictable? No, there's always going to be curveballs in life, but there's 2 things that I can guarantee you. 1, we're all going to have to pay taxes, and 2, we're all going to die. I know, it's morbid, right? But it's true. And that's where life insurance comes in. Life insurance is a selfless act. At the end of the day, it's meant for your loved ones in the event you were to pass away unexpectedly. And not that money can ever replace us, but I always liked the idea of leaving some money behind for my brothers, whether that be for their college education, or a down payment on a house, or even just time off of work to grieve. Because the last thing I would want for my family is to have to go to work and pay the bills while they're grieving. And so life insurance gives you the peace of mind that no matter when you pass away, your loved ones are taken care of. With flexible plans, affordable premiums, and coverage that fits your unique needs, I do the shopping around for you so that you can get the protection without the hassle. Because taking care of your future doesn't have to be complicated. If you'd like to discuss options, you can send me an email at krigadel15lrxc@wfgmail.ca or give me a phone call at 403-785-7670 to learn more and get a free quote today so you can live tomorrow with peace of mind.
Like the type of like design. Like you're looking up literal strands of fabric at this point.
Unreal.
Good.
You know what? Anyone who does that job, like, good for you, because that seems hella tedious. And I don't know if either of us have that kind of patience.
Let me ask you.
Yes.
For this specific job, who do you think would be better at it? Who would have more patience? Because I think I have the answer.
Okay, I do too. Let me go first.
Okay.
I think it would be you.
I also think the same thing.
Yeah.
I think we'd both equally find it frustrating, but I definitely think that I would have a slight edge on you on that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you like puzzles a bit more than I do and stuff like that. So I think you could have the stick-to-itness and like determination to figure it out, especially based on the crime that happened.
Oh, 100%. I'd be motivated as hell.
I probably could get through it, but I would enjoy it a little less than you.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
So in addition to this fabric and the ripping of strands that was matched together, sheets and bedding recovered from the garbage can were also connected to the crime. Investigators also found both Chris and Shannon's jeans that they were wearing on the night of this whole crime taking place at the crime scene. Now, when the autopsies were done, the results outlined the brutality of the crimes against Channon and Chris. And these details are not for the faint of heart, so consider this your warning. So Chris Newman had died from a gunshot wound to the right side of his head that instantly severed his brainstem. In addition, he had 2 other gunshot wounds, one in the back that left him paralyzed, and then one in the neck. And before he had died, he had been raped by a male and sodomized by at least one object. Now, Becky, for me, the word sodomize reminds me so much of the word cauterize a wound type thing. They just sound similar that I almost get the 2 mixed up. And I know that's not what it means.
It is not.
And obviously in this context, he was sodomized with an object. So I can put 2 and 2 together. But why don't you tell everyone, like, what that actually means to sodomize someone?
Right. So typically it's like a sexual act that usually involves the anus or an oral cavity. And it can be done with, like a penis or really any other object.
Right. And I think criminally, it has been used to kind of explain unwanted sexual acts with, a penis or an object in the anal or the oral cavity, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So that's what it is. Obviously not what I thought it was or what I always mistake it for.
Like,
so
I'm sitting here thinking, but like, did you like somehow also kind of mix up, like, did you ever do soldering in school, like in art class?
yeah, I did actually with the metal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bev's over here be like, what? We learned that in school.
Oh, jeez.
No, we did not.
No, definitely not in high school or junior high.
Well, that's a bad one to get
That's
mixed
like a
up here,
university
Bev.
course, I'm sure. Either way, as graphic as this all is, we now know what happened to Chris, and he was raped.
Yeah, he was.
Semen was found in his anal cavity, although the fire did enough damage that they could not get a DNA profile from the DNA sample that they
Extracted.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, when Shannon's autopsy commenced, it was determined that her assault went on for hours. They determined Chris had been killed well before Channon. Channon had extensive bruising, hemorrhaging, in fact, and lacerations on her genitals. She was raped vaginally, anally, and sodomized with a blunt object. There was evidence that she had been orally assaulted, as the frenulum, which is the tissue connecting the lips to the gum, was torn.
Ooh.
She also had severe bruises and abrasions around her mouth. She had bruises on her arms, the front of her legs, her upper back, her neck, and the top of her head. She had scratches and carpet burns on her lower back and buttocks. The bruises on her head were severe, with major hemorrhaging. She had a cut on her right hand, although that was unclear whether it was a defensive wound or not, and the suspects used bleach in an attempt to destroy evidence. So they actually ended up pouring bleach into her mouth and down her throat. And there was bleach all over her genital area as well. Bleach was also found on her sweater and camisole, which, as we know, she was discovered wearing.
Mm-hmm.
They believed the perps tried to get rid of evidence by bleaching Channon. Fortunately, the medical examiner found the presence of spermatozoa and sperm fragments in Shannon's mouth, vagina, and on various items of her clothing, and were able to get 2 different male DNA profiles. But even after this horrendous ordeal, Channon was still thought to be alive, and she ultimately died from positional asphyxiation. So after being shoved into several garbage bags and one of them having been wrapped around her head. Her estimated time of death was between Sunday afternoon and Monday afternoon.
So they were assumed to be taken Saturday night sometime. Or
Wow.
Sunday very early morning, right?
Yeah, so wow. What she endured is heartbreaking. And then we think back to the phone call she made to her dad, and knowing that like around the time that her friends and Chris's friends thought that they were just kind of like off wanting alone time, like they were taken at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems that like the perps obviously tried to get her to call her family to kind of like
Cover their tracks or cover the timeline.
oh, that's just horrific, Becky.
It is.
And what's even worse is that she remained alive long enough for bruises to form and for blood to clot around her injuries. So it was estimated that she would have run out of air in the garbage can within 10 to 30 minutes. And then it would have taken approximately another 3 to 5 minutes after running out of air in the garbage can for her to officially pass away as a result of lack of oxygen.
Exactly.
So detectives at this point know what happened to these people. Like, like it's very clear a horrific crime took place, and they're still missing the suspects, the people who lived in the home. So they start canvassing the area to see if they could get more information. And people start coming forward, and they begin to get a timeline of the evening events, starting with Chris's friend Josh. So we know Chris picked up Channon a little after 9 p.m. on Saturday night. And a woman in the area told investigators that she had sold Lamaricus a bunch of household items, including some furniture and floral fabric curtains. And at the time that she sold them to him, he didn't have the money to pay up front for it all, but had made an arrangement with the woman to pay her $75 to $100 every other Saturday. And on January 6th, between 10 to 10:30 p.m., Lamaricus was to go to her house to make a payment. Coincidentally, the woman lived at the Washington Ridge Apartments, the same complex where Shannon's friend lived and she was at.
And
However,
where Chris picked her up.
Exactly. However, Lamaricus never showed up to pay on that Saturday night. Now, around 12:30 a.m., a Waste Connections employee was working on Chipman Street, and most of the houses in that area were dark, as most people were asleep.
Right.
However, the employee noticed that all the lights were on at 2316 Chipman Street, Lamaricus's house. And this stood out to the employee because of the time of night and just how contrasted this house was to the others in the area. The waste worker also noticed an empty 4Runner SUV parked out front with its headlights on, as well as a white sedan parked behind it. And then at 12:33 a.m., Channon called her father and told him she would be home around 2 or 3 a.m. And this call lasted 31 seconds.
So this was just minutes after that worker saw Shannon's 4Runner out front of that home.
Yes. Now, around 1 a.m., that same Waste Connections worker that initially saw the 4Runner sitting outside of the home was sitting in a gravel parking lot beside the 2316 Chipman Street address. He had been waiting for the person who was supposed to be training him, and the trainer was running 45 minutes late, so the worker went to a local convenience store to get snacks and a drink. A little while after 1 a.m., he returned to the parking lot, and while parked, he saw the 4Runner he had noticed earlier driving towards him. As it passed, it slowed down, and 3 male adults inside stared him down. He also noticed a 4th man in the passenger seat who appeared to be leaned back and slightly slumped over. The worker became concerned when the 4Runner made a U-turn and started heading back in his direction. Feeling scared, he called his dad. Fortunately, the 4Runner drove past him without stopping. The waste worker didn't see too many details, but was able to confirm that the men he saw were African American. And then at approximately 1:45 a.m., a witness who was awake watching TV heard 3 pops. They never called it in, as it didn't occur to them that the sounds were gunshots. They just assumed young people were setting off firecrackers. But as we know, Chris was shot 3 times, so
That tracks.
that tracks. Then at 6:45 a.m., as the Waste Connections worker was getting off work, he saw that the 4Runner was still parked in front of the Chipman home, and smoke could be seen rising from the train track area. Then, a couple of hours before Channon was killed, Lamaricus called Daphne, his recent ex-girlfriend, and told her he had a bunch of clothing for her. He said he would have it ready in about half an hour, but instead of waiting, Daphne headed over right away.
She's like, I'm gonna get me some clothes.
Yeah. Which, again, we can really think back to the clothes in the back of Shannon's vehicle that were missing. So when Daphne arrives, Lamaricus seemed suspicious, and she actually thought he had another woman in the home. The bedroom was empty, but the bathroom door was, in fact, locked. She tried to get in, explaining that she had left makeup there and wanted to retrieve it. Lamaricus told her that Vanessa was in the bathroom, but Daphne didn't believe him. She attempted to go through the bathroom's second door, but Lamaricus grabbed her, yelled that she didn't live there anymore, and kicked her out after handing her a Sears bag full of clothing.
Now, keep in mind, Daphne and Lamaricus had recently broken up.
Right, so
Like,
she's
it had
kind of
been
jealous.
days. Yeah. She's like, you got another woman?
Yeah, she's
You
like,
got it,
how
what?
dare you? So she wants to check it out,
Yeah,
but he
for
throws
sure.
her out. So Daphne at that point also noted that Lamaricus's brother, Latalvis, and his friend George were there at the time that she had entered the home. When Daphne got home, she realized all the clothing was used. She kept 1 pair of jeans and a couple of other items, but ultimately called Lamaricus to come pick them up. And a little while later, he showed up in her place driving the 4Runner. At that point, all the stickers were still on the windows. Daphne had no idea where the vehicle came from.
If only she knew.
Well, no doubt, but we do.
Mm-hmm.
Now, early on Monday, in between Shannon's family finding her 4Runner and the police showing up for the search warrant, Lamaricus had called his ex Daphne again, saying the house was locked and his brother Latalvis had the key. So she went, picked him up, and he stayed with Daphne at her friend's apartment. The following day, Daphne's mother calls her, explaining the police had found a dead body in Lamarcus's home. Horrified, she asked him to leave immediately. Because she had picked him up, she made sure to arrange for some friends to take Lamarcus to his buddy Eric Boyd's mother's home. Then Eric and Lamarcus headed to their friend Danielle Lightfoot's apartment and asked to stay the night, and she let them in. The following day, Lamarcus was on the news and was wanted by the police. When Danielle saw him on the news, she kicked him out. Eric and Lamarcus had asked several friends and acquaintances if they could stay with them or help them to get to another state, but unfortunately they had no luck.
Can you imagine all these people are like finding out this horrible thing or real sketchy thing? Because I guess they don't know 100% the details, but they're all just like, you know what, just get out. I'm not harboring you, but get out. I'm not going to call the police because you're my friend, but no one said shit.
Yeah, I mean,
They had
it
to like
is
track
shocking.
these people down, and they're like, oh yeah, you know what? He did stay at my house. I did see him wanted on the news, but you had to come to me. Isn't that weird?
I think it is a little bit weird. Now that you say it, I'm like, what?
Like
I
I
thought
would
good for them for kicking him out, but
at
also
least.
like at least. But I'm like, yeah, why wouldn't you call the police?
Yeah, like if that was any of my friends or family, and I saw it, I'd be like, yeah, get the fuck out, you fucking psycho. But then I'd like watch them drive away and be like, 911, 911. Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god.
Like, you know who was just at my house? Like,
The
yeah.
murderer!
Yeah, no, good
Yeah.
point, Becky. So that Thursday, Eric Boyd was actually stopped by the police leaving his mother's place with a McDonald's bag in his hand. And he directed the police to an abandoned home where he and Lamarcus had broken into and were hiding out. Lamarcus was then taken into custody, and police searched the abandoned house where they found him. And what they found was shocking. They find Chris's Nike shoes and a .22 caliber revolver.
Man, these guys, like,
You know you're wanted by the police. You're in an abandoned home, like, hiding out. You're going to keep all this, like, evidence?
I can only assume he was wearing the shoes, because, like, why else just carry around a pair of shoes?
Yeah, but, like, obviously one of, like, what it could be potentially a murder weapon,
As well, yeah.
you know?
Like, I have to laugh, because earlier we said that they used a ridiculous amount of bleach and fire to try and get rid of DNA evidence,
Yes.
right? But then they left so much evidence in the home, and then they take evidence with them, connecting them to the victims who in any other moment would never have like come across each other's paths.
No doubt.
So it's like,
Why go through all the effort of doing that just to, like, be caught with, like, valuable evidence on hand?
I know,
know?
like it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense to me either. But again, we know.
Criminals, brilliant,
Stupid.
genius levels.
Yeah. So doesn't make sense to the common folk, Becky.
But we love evidence, regardless of how dumb the criminals were.
Yes. And now Lamarcus is in custody, and he quickly gives up his friends who were involved in the crime.
What a dick. Snitches
Yeah.
get stitches.
Yeah, he's kind of like, I'm not going down for this alone, I guess.
Yep.
And he names his brother Latalvis Cobbins, George Thomas, and Vanessa Coleman. Now, all three of these named individuals had fled to the Commonwealth of Kentucky, but were apprehended on January 11th. All were returned to Knoxville, Tennessee, to face both federal and state charges. And upon wrangling up all the other suspects, the police learned that Eric Boyd was involved as well.
Oh, the McDonald's man.
Yeah, obviously, I mean, he's hiding out with Lamarcus, so it kind of does make sense that he might be involved.
Right, because why hide out with him if you didn't
Yeah.
do anything?
Yeah, just stay at your mother's house.
Yeah.
He was the one who had driven the white sedan that followed the Forerunner home after the carjacking. So, this is kind of the first time we've mentioned it, but we kind of know that Lamarcus had gone to the apartment complex that Channon lived in to pay for the curtains and whatnot from that lady,
Mm-hmm.
that he never showed up to pay her. But we also know that Channon and Chris were there that night as well. So what happened is they probably all drove there in the white sedan with Eric, saw Chris and Channon in the Forerunner, jacked their car, and abducted them.
Exactly. And we will actually get into that a little bit more down the road when we start looking at some court testimonies, is where we basically find out really what happened.
Right.
The full details.
Yeah, but as we're mentioning the carjacking, That'd be nice to kind of put those two together right now.
Yeah.
And the white sedan actually belonged to an individual named Nicole Mathis, which was a cousin of Eric Boyd. And she had lent her car to Boyd for the weekend. Now, each person, or suspect, gives a different version of the evening. George Thomas seems to be the most accurate statement based on the evidence and timeline created by witnesses. However, that being said, based on the accounts of all of the perps, they agreed on why they were visiting Lamarcus.
In Knoxville.
Yeah, so basically all of them had said that Latalvis, Lamarcus's brother, his girlfriend Vanessa, and George had come to Knoxville from Memphis for the weekend to see Lamarcus as he had recently gotten out of jail. And on that Saturday night, Lamarcus and his brother wanted to go jack a car. So Lamarcus took Latalvis and Eric with him. They smoked what is called a wet joint, which is marijuana dipped in an embalming fluid that has, I think it like heightens the effects, right, Bex?
Yeah, it heightens the effects and then adds some extra so they could like hallucinate. They could become rage-filled. Yeah. It's just like, it's not a good thing.
Right. It's just like, it's like a next level joint.
Yeah, it's almost like doing a harder drug, but
in the form of a joint.
Yeah.
So after they smoke this joint, they see Chris and Channon by her Forerunner. And they run up to them, wielding a gun, forced them into the back seat, where they blindfolded and tied their wrists. Lamarca and Latalvis were both in the Forerunner, and Eric Boyd followed them back to the Chipman Street home in the white sedan.
Yeah.
They brought them into the home, where Chris was almost immediately assaulted in the sunroom at the front of the home by Eric Boyd. At that time, Channon was in the front bedroom with Lamarcus. Eventually, the men take Chris out to the SUV and drive him to an industrial building near the train tracks, where Chris is forced to walk through the mud barefoot. And according to George, that's when Eric Boyd ultimately shoots and kills Chris Newsom, then lit him on fire. After they get back to the house, Eric then leaves in his white sedan. And he eventually does come back, though. Through the rest of the night, George says the group smokes a bunch of weed. But what happens specifically in those hours is unknown. Like, from the testimony of the perps. It's not clearly articulated, but from the evidence, we have a pretty good fucking understanding, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the DNA found in Shannon's genitals and pants matched Lamarcus's DNA. And the DNA found in Shannon's mouth, sweater, and camisole matched Latalvis's DNA. There was no DNA or fingerprint from Eric Boyd or George Thomas on Chris or Channon. Now, Vanessa had claimed she was there when all this went down, but was held hostage and couldn't leave. However, a journal was found in the home, and the handwriting matched Vanessa Coleman, and it said on January 9th, "Last night was one of a kind. We stayed with a crackhead that is cool as hell. It snowed a little bit, but it's already melted. Let's talk about adventures. I had one hell of an adventure. Since I've been in the big TN, it's a crazy world these days. But I love the fun adventures and lessons that I've learned. It's going to be a long, interesting year."
So, although that doesn't like specifically detail the events of these crimes, it does show that maybe she wasn't being held hostage. It was a fun, crazy night.
Yeah.
Like, who writes that if they're actually being held hostage through this really traumatic event?
Yeah, no doubt.
Like, we would expect her to be like, that was one fucked up, crazy night. I saw the worst thing of my life. I can't believe I had to witness that. I'll forever be fucking tainted and scarred.
Yeah, no doubt.
Like, that's not what you write.
She's like, oh my god, what a crazy year. Like,
it's gonna be so interesting what comes next, basically.
Yeah.
Like, no, so
it calls into question her testimony.
For sure.
So, once all the 5 suspects have been apprehended, they were all slapped with charges, and these charges ranged from first-degree murder to failing to report the location of an unknown felon. And the trials for these individuals were extensive. In April of 2008, Eric Boyd was charged with accessory to a carjacking, resulting in serious bodily injury to another person and failing to report the location of a known felon, and he was found guilty and sentenced to 18 years in prison.
So one question you might have with that, Bev, is, as far as we know, George testified that he killed Chris.
Right. Like, why wasn't that part of his charges.
Well, exactly. So initially, George wasn't called as a witness to what happened. So as far as they knew, he was just an accessory to the carjacking, stuff like that. So that's all they
Okay.
could charge him with.
Dang.
Yeah.
I mean, thank God he got 18 years in prison,
Exactly.
but like kind of unfortunate that he wasn't held accountable for maybe all of his actions that night.
Well, exactly.
Now, in August of 2009, Latalvis Cobbins was given 46 charges. The charges included felony murder, robbery, 2 counts of premeditated murder, 2 counts of especially aggravated robbery, 4 counts of especially aggravated kidnapping, 20 counts of aggravated rape, and 2 counts of theft. He was found guilty and sentenced to life without parole. That tracks.
Yep.
In October of 2009, Lamarcus Davidson faced the same charges as his brother, and he was also found guilty but was sentenced to death, plus an additional 80 years he would serve concurrently. And in December of 2009, George Thomas also faced the same 46 charges as both Latalvis and Lamarcus. He was found guilty and sentenced to life without parole. Now, this one I do find a little bit, shocking, only because, his DNA was not found on the victims.
Yeah.
It was, both Latalvis's and Lamarcus's DNA was found on Shannon's body and her clothing, right? And there was none with George, so I'm just kind of shocked that the exact same charges, I mean, he was obviously a part of it. He was there. So I'm not saying he's not
guilty.
Yeah, or in some way responsible for Shannon's death. He did nothing to stop it. But I'm just based on the fact there was none of his DNA on it, I'm just kind of shocked that he got the exact same.
It is. Yeah, it is. You think his charges might have been just a little lighter or something?
Yeah, maybe the sentence would have been the same and he still would have been charged with life without parole. But it's still, I'm still shocked by that because there was none of his DNA anywhere.
And I think the point that with everything that I read and researched and all the testimony that I watched and gathered is that basically because specifically Shannon's assault went on for so long, the fact that he did nothing to stop the rapes, he had opportunity to free them.
Right.
When Chris was taken to the tracks.
And he didn't.
And so therefore it's almost like his inaction
made him equally responsible for her death.
Exactly. And at the end of the day, we don't actually know if he participated in those rapes. We just have no idea because there's no physical evidence. But yeah, his inaction got him those charges.
Which I do think is fair. I think that's fair. Because she lived for quite a while after she was abducted. So
he had multiple opportunities
to potentially save a life.
Yeah.
So,
or call the police or anything, right?
In that regard, I definitely agree. I just was shocked that his DNA wasn't there and he got the same charges.
For
but
sure.
I definitely agree that he is just as responsible.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, Vanessa Coleman was also hit with a total of 40 charges. She was charged with felony murder, robbery, kidnapping, 1 count of premeditated murder, 4 counts of especially aggravated kidnapping, 20 counts of aggravated rape, and she was found guilty and sentenced to 53 years as well.
So, and this kind of is the same situation as George, right?
Yeah.
Where there's no evidence, physical evidence suggesting that she did any of the raping, anything like that, or the murder itself. But again, her inaction, and she had the same opportunities to free Shannon or call the police.
Yeah, do something, right?
Yeah. So although she was charged with a couple less charges, her she was still hit with 40 charges.
Yeah, absolutely.
And after seeing that letter, when she tried to say, "Oh, I was basically what word? Held against her will while this was going on."
Thank you. Hostage. Apparently.
Yeah. I think that letter showed that she was a willing witness at least.
Yeah, and it also shows a lack of remorse for what happened, because when you really hear what happened in the autopsy specifically to Shannon, not that I don't empathize with what happened to Chris, because I do, but Shannon, what she endured
went
so
on and on and
messed up.
Oh yeah.
She was tortured.
Yeah.
So if you are okay with something like that happening,
you deserve every single one of those charges.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, all of the sentences and convictions were put under scrutiny when Judge Richard Baumgartner stepped down due to misconduct.
Ooh.
because he had had an intimate relationship with a woman going through a drug rehabilitation court program and had been obtaining pills from her for his own addiction. So the judge was given a diversionary sentence, which led to all cases being reviewed. And because of this, George Thomas and Vanessa received new trials, where they were convicted again but with lighter sentences. And in November 2012, Vanessa was sentenced to 35 years in prison. And in May 2013, George was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 53 years. The rest of the convictions and sentencing were upheld. So obviously, I think, based on what we just said, and just like the lack of DNA and proof that they actually committed like rape or murder,
Mm-hmm.
I think that is where the lighter sentence does come in. But again, with the whole, they still need to be held accountable for their inaction,
Mm-hmm.
is still present.
For sure. And knowing that like basically 2 juries convicted them of that, you're like, yeah, for sure they deserved.
Yeah, we weren't
Every
in
year
that
they got-
trial.
Yeah.
We don't know, but like obviously,
Yeah.
you know.
Mm-hmm.
So in 2019, more recently actually, Eric Boyd was later found guilty in state court after being accused by LaTalvis and George of the rape and murder of Chris Newsom. So that actually tracks with George's testimony.
Yes.
Right? So he
Mhm.
got a new, got charged with those, went through trial, and he was convicted of first-degree felony murder, first-degree premeditated murder, especially aggravated robbery, kidnapping, and rape. And he was given 2 life sentences.
Right. And interesting enough, because we, not for a fact, because there's no physical evidence, but based on George's testimony, we know that Eric was responsible for Chris's murder and sexual assault.
Yeah,
right?
it's nice that, years later, justice is served in that regard as well. Right?
Exactly. And then he was also charged with Shannon's, though, because he had left, remember? And then he came back.
Yes, you're right. So it's kind of similar to George and Vanessa, where it's
Mhm.
like, you did nothing to stop this poor woman from
Yeah.
also dying.
Yeah, from her tragic death.
Mhm.
But also if he was so willing to have sexually assaulted Chris and then kill him,
yeah.
could he have participated and maybe there's no DNA?
Yeah.
We'll never know. So,
It's just nice for him to be held responsible in some regard, right?
yeah, and years later, it's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like this is scratching an itch for me almost. You know, it's yes.
Justice. All the justice.
Yeah, it's these people are getting what was coming to them.
Yeah.
There was no dipsy doodling around the court system.
Mm-mm.
There was no getting off easy, none of that. It was eventually it was all
it all came full circle.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That's the best when we're talking about all these murders and disappearances. We've had a couple instances where people get let off pretty easily.
Yeah.
And it just feels like it wasn't good justice, even though I guess they were held accountable. It just didn't seem fair for what they took from the world, right?
Yeah, and this does.
But this, it's no, you got slapped with every damn charge that you possibly could be.
Yeah.
And you will be in jail pretty much the rest of your life.
Yeah.
All of them.
Yeah.
You know?
Except for Vanessa.
Yeah. That's true. But at least she'll still be in there till a pretty old age.
Yeah.
She'll miss
all of the
informative years.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's awesome.
Feels good. And in addition to the sentences, an act was passed called the Chris Newsom Act in 2014 in Tennessee. And it was a law that eliminated what is called the 13th juror rule, which requires a judge to sign off on a verdict when the jury is unanimous. And this was done because when Judge Baumgartner's addiction came to light, he had not signed off on the verdict form. And the judge replacing him could not be the 13th juror, as he was not there to witness the trial, which ultimately led to the retrials.
Mm-hmm.
And to them getting lighter sentences, right? So if he had signed off on it, they would not have gotten a new trial, but he did not. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
That's why they got the new trials.
Exactly.
Huh.
Now, luckily, the others, there was just so much evidence that it was he didn't even need to sign off. You can't get around that DNA evidence and the testimony of all the other perps, right?
So there's certain stipulations that require the 13th juror's rule, Becky?
No.
Well, it must be, because if
No.
he didn't have to sign off on the ones that had so much evidence, why not those ones, but George and Vanessa.
It's because when it was like reevaluated by the higher courts, they basically looked at the evidence and the court proceedings and were like, no.
Oh, so the judge probably signed off on those unanimous jury as well, but when the higher courts reviewed them, they didn't like.
No, Baumgardner had not signed off on any of them, but they all were looked at. It's not like they were automatically given a new trial. They were reviewed by the higher courts to see if there were any errors made by the judge besides the signing off. Like, they just wanted to see if it was like a legit trial and that, no other errors occurred. But because of the evidence and the severity
and specifically the DNA evidence, they're like, no, this for sure. These ones, like the jury got it completely correct.
Yeah.
But then the ones without the DNA evidence and then the lack of the judge signing off on them, they were like, oh,
they get a retrial.
Oh, okay. That makes more sense. I was curious because I'm like, what is going on here? Like, why would the 13th juror not apply to some but others? But that makes a lot of sense, Becky.
Yeah, it's just because they were reviewed.
Okay, cool. Well, I like that law was passed.
Right? Because, like, you get a judge that's addicted and forgets, oh, I forgot to sign off, but it's a real charge. Like, they were for sure guilty. Like, that, it would suck that someone could potentially get off on, like, that type of technicality.
No doubt.
When all jurors were unanimous.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah.
I think it's a good law to pass.
Totally.
So, as well, there was another act that was passed called the Channon Christian Act. And so, during the trial, Lamaricus and his defense team suggested that Chris and Channon had willingly gone to his home to buy drugs, attempting to paint the victims in a negative light in an effort to explain why his DNA was found in the car. And this act that they passed prevents the defense from using such tactics to sway the jury.
Well, exactly right. And to be clear, Channon and Chris were never have believed to dabble in drugs.
Okay.
Like they were straight edge, good people.
So, like, maybe just, like, clear this up for me, because it's, like, using such tactics, like, to sway the jury. Is it just, like, bullshit? Like, coming up with complete bullshit? Like, what tactics are we referring to?
Basically, they wanted to taint Channon and Chris's character, saying, like, they were there to buy drugs. They were dabbling in illegal activity.
So you need some proof behind what you're saying. You can't just, like, create just complete bullshit to, like, put a story in the jurors' heads that could potentially, like, make them think differently of the victims.
Well, exactly. Like, if, imagine being a juror, hearing that, be like, oh, okay, so they were there buying drugs, so that makes sense why maybe some of their stuff could have been there. There was DNA, blah, blah, blah. I mean, not a dead body,
You're
but...
like, there's no evidence that these two victims had ever done drugs, period. So
yes.
You can't say that.
Yeah, you can't just make up a story that's unfounded to paint the victim in a negative picture, right? If it was true, you can use it, sure. But you can't just lie. They weren't those type of people.
Right. Okay. Well, that's good too, because I think defense attorneys can get, like, creative in their bullshit stories that they use. And so it's kind of good that there's some limitations on that, right?
I mean, we just watched the new Netflix series, the OJ. Well, I don't know what it's called. The O.J. Simpson one that just came out recently.
Oh, man, that was fucked up.
And imagine if that law was in effect in that trial. That probably would have helped the prosecution a lot. Because they definitely tried to, like, make Nicole Simpson they tried to paint her in a completely different light.
I'm trying to think, because, like, I know what you're saying. Like, I'm like, it was really fucked up. Like, they really went all out.
Mm.
But I'm like, did they actually use, like, just complete bullshit? Like, I'm like, because, like, I feel like they just, like, shifted the narrative to, like, racial things. Like, I'm just trying to think,
I mean,
like, what
that
do you
was,
mean?
like, I think the main thing for sure. But they also spoke about how Nicole Simpson was, like, doing drugs, out partying all the time, like, being not as maybe the most responsible mother.
Right. Yeah.
So, and I mean, I don't know how true or not true that was, but she's the goddamn victim.
Yeah.
And that doesn't change that she was brutally murdered, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think there was hardcore evidence to suggest that either.
Well, I did sleep through a little bit of it.
Mm.
I feel like I'm
Bevy, how
so
could
like
you?
I know, like, just like, I'm pregnant, but whatever. But no, like, so I did actually, I don't think I got that part of it, but that would make sense how that would fit. But can we just say, like, I really believe O.J. Simpson was totally responsible. Like, I think my mouth hit the floor. My jaw hit the floor when his friend was like, I think you did it, OJ.
Mm.
And OJ was like, if she hadn't come to the door with that knife, she'd still be alive today. I was like,
Hot damn.
What? If you guys haven't watched that, you guys need to.
Yeah.
Because,
I mean, like,
holy
feel free to
shit.
make up your own mind about it, but, like, me and Bev are on the same page.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, yeah.
So
Anyways.
another reason why this act passing on Shannon's behalf was so good was because, according to Shannon's mother, her family felt a great deal of pain as a result of listening to the defense attorneys question her character during multiple trials. Meanwhile, her daughter's, like, character
Murderer?
is being tainted.
Oh.
Due to laws protecting the accused, the jury was not allowed to be informed of Lamarcus's previous carjacking conviction. So, like, the accused is being protected, but her daughter is just getting, like, dragged through the mud in these trials.
By lies, too.
Yeah. So it's just, like, I think it's just, like, adds a little bit of extra, like, joy to the fact that this law was passed.
Oh, absolutely.
Because hopefully another mother or family won't have to go through the same thing that Shannon's family did, right?
Yeah.
Because that would be hard. You know who your daughter is. You know how brutally she was killed, and then you have to hear people just, like, talk shit about her.
Yeah.
And made up bullshit.
For sure. And I think one of the best indicators of, like, how not like that, like, in regards to the drug world that Shannon was, when her father realized her phone is pinging in Cherry Street.
And he's
Kind
like,
of a-
what?
She would never be down there, right?
Yeah.
And I know people keep, like, secrets, but the family just wasn't buying it, right?
Yeah, they're like, that's so out of character for my
she would
daughter.
never be down there. So I think that law's good. Protect the victims
Yes, I
and their
agree.
character.
Now, another silver lining is that a foundation was created in Shannon's name. It was called the Shannon Gale Christian Foundation, and the Shannon Gale Christian Memorial Golf Tournament was also established in her memory to provide a scholarship for a Farragut High School senior to attend the University of Tennessee. A foundation has also been established in Chris Newsom's name. And this foundation holds an annual memorial baseball tournament at the Halls Community Park, and a memorial scholarship is awarded annually in his name to a graduating Halls High School baseball player. So, I don't know, it just honors the victims, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, he was a baseball player, and it's given to a baseball player, and, you know, she was such a good student. I don't know, it's just like, it takes all the good parts of them and,
like, pays that
remembers it.
forward.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I really like that.
Yeah. Now, in another positive turn of events, in October of 2008, the home where all of this horrible stuff happened on Chipman Street, the house was purchased by Waste Connections, which was the guy, the
employee
witness,
that
right?
witnessed
He
it.
worked there.
Yeah.
They purchased the home and demolished it. They planted a tree in honor of Shannon and Chris, and they also created a memorial on the side of the property to remember them by.
Wow.
So that company did that.
Yeah, that's so amazing. They're
Mhm.
like, get rid of this shithole and all the freaking trash
that went on.
and let's, like, remember the victims. I just really think that this whole case, like, I just feel like, I don't know, the perps were rightfully
Convicted and
sentenced, and Shannon and Chris were uplifted in all the ways that they could be.
For
and
sure.
I like that. So
For sure. Yeah, amongst all that tragedy, for those two things to happen does not always happen in cases. And so it's really the best thing that can come of it based on what happened.
yes.
Whew. Jeez, Bev. This was a terrible, brutal case.
It was a doozy.
And despite all the horror you just, like, spewed on me, thanks for sharing.
Thanks for listening, Becky.
And just
Here's your weekly reminder to download our weekly episodes, follow us on Spotify or Apple Music or whatever streaming platform you listen to us on, and give us a follow on our social medias. You can find us at Luminol on the Wall. Can't wait till next week.